Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as Mike would say. My name's Ethan, I'm founder and CEO at Automedi, and I want to take you through this particular AcceliGOV prize and how the format of it will work. Without further ado, I'm going to talk about obviously what Automedi is, what our mission is, the impact summary that we've had so far, a bit about the application, some hints and tips for applicants, and give time for questions and answers at the end. I'm willing to take questions after the event as well, so if you do have any, bunch them together, send them over, and I can answer them all as a one. Our mission statement is to make sustainable, equitable, and circular economies for everyone, everywhere, with everything as easy as possible. And we do that by turning plastic pollution from trash into profit with purpose. Now, plastic is a perennial problem. Every year, the world disposes of around 340 million tons of new plastic rubbish. Right? There's 8 billion tons of plastic that's ever been made, and only about 9% of that has been recycled. Partly because recycling is a relatively new phenomenon in the era of plastics. So basically, only the last sort of 15, 20 years or so. But it's not just the plastic itself that's the problem. There's also the freight that went into it, the transportation, the manufacturing emissions, and all of these creates $1.6 trillion worth of trade-related respiratory disease, which in turn requires another 1.2 million tons of CO2 emissions just to transport things like inhalers around or to create treatments for people with respiratory disorders. And all of that comes together with a destructive process for these plastics that needs to suck up more virgin material, which is inefficient and actually loses the world around $30 trillion of wasted economic potential. Now, if you think about the linear take, make, waste economies, what you miss often in these models is the fact that the process doesn't stop there. People's demands and needs don't stop there. So typically what happens is that you'll take something, you'll use it, you'll throw it away, but then you need another one of those things or another very similar thing or something that's different but has a similar material composition from the beginning again. And that means you're adding and accumulating all that transportation, warehousing, manufacturing, and disposal emissions time and time again. So you really get this kind of cycle of stuff. So when you dispose of waste, you're doing that with the accumulated emissions of everything that came before that disposal state. And you're accumulating it again. But what's worse is that, as we've seen over the last sort of couple of years or so, we cannot rely on the robustness of these supply chains. The fact that they've kind of worked for a while has actually been the product of both accident and consistent risk planning. Because what that has required is huge supply chain redundancy in a lot of ways to be able to get parcels, for example, from the manufacturers all the way to the users. But as we've seen, that cannot be relied upon in an era where there's total disruption throughout the process. For example, through war, through blockages in key supply routes, through climate change nowadays, especially as we saw last year, where places like China, which manufacture a lot of goods used in the global north, had to shut down its factories due to the heat wave. It literally dried up the power sources in those plants and manufacturing facilities that were powered through hydroelectric because there simply wasn't the water to create the power through turbines. And the same is true of manufacturing and material recovery because those are actually susceptible to things like blockages and contamination through the wrong sorts of plastics or hybrid materials. For example, conveyor belts often get clogged up in these material recovery facilities because of the fact that soft plastics gets wound into it time and time again. So we need to think very differently about the way the waste systems and the manufacturing and supply systems work to deliver these gains to our shores. And that's really what Automedi is about, because we are unifying the cradle-to-cradle circular economy process by doing it all in one place, but in a distributed fashion. And we do that in a way that creates an opportunity to distribute the work and manufacture on the demand side of the supply chain, basically where people are and within the last mile. By doing that, that cuts out all the trunk emissions and creates a local manufacturing sovereignty, if you like, for each individual region or even country. We do that by smartly connecting the capture, reprocessing, reconstituting, and manufacturing all in one. And that also allows us to gather data in real time about how the waste is being processed. And because we recycle in a novel way, we can reconstitute the waste multiple times over and also create novel types of product with an optimal amount of plastic use. That means we can take a kilogram of plastics and make much more economic value out of it. And that means it radically and exponentially reduces the demand for virgin plastics at the sharp end of the coalface, literally. So we do that by collecting waste from elsewhere, processing it, creating a filament out of it, and using that filament to refill our distributed 3D print fleet, which can act individually like vending machines or together as a distributed factory. And it makes everything. There's no need to heat significant amounts of metal mass for injection molding. It also doesn't require individual milling of products because you can make these through the same manufacturing process, because 3D printing allows you to do that. It can make literally anything. Now, catalogs currently have hundreds of products in them from both public and private outlets, i.e. those which we make available to the community and those under NDA with our existing client base. And this comparison does show a very significant gain, not just in terms of the cost savings, but also in the loss of embodied carbon and the disposal emissions that would normally be released when sending these to landfill or incinerating them. Whether that's products for the laboratories and the ancillary parts of care, or whether that is plumbing tools or DIY fixtures and fittings. And what this does is democratize the process in such a way that it makes the community the factory. That's right. In essence, the civic societies can create and restore the foundational economies of manufacturing back to their shores for the same sorts of costs as products can be bought and transported from other parts of the world, which creates this rebalancing and reintroducing the manufacturing facilities does give people the opportunity for greater independence and also creates jobs, but does so in a socially responsible and climate friendlier way. By doing it this way, it removes the needs for virgin plastic and crucially helps clean up the waste that exists in the environment by making it a resource that has a monetary and efficacy value to it. And this is why a lot of organizations have come to us and are working with us to help deliver radical changes to their supply chains, including, believe it or not, organizations who are in the logistics space. By doing that, they are able to teleport products straight to their own clients, which in turn massively reduces their costs, giving them a greater margin for much lower investment. Each node that Automedi launches is less than the cost of running a truck for a year. I mean, that shows you the sort of scale at which this can occur, because now you're taking the same investment that could be placed into things like MRFs or large-scale age-of-waste plants and then turning them into thousands upon thousands of distributed circular units that process waste more or less where it's made. So to give you a couple of examples of that impact, what we've done is kind of aggregate the average numbers together, and these change all the time. Here you can see, for example, that every single cluster delivers these benefits. That includes a gross profit of around $3,000 a month, together with over 100 trees planted, and saves typically 4.75 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of waste that's disposed of. So you can see that the benefits are really, really large. And as an example of some of the trials we've done before, so with the NHS Northwest project, we managed to find that we could deliver around £90 worth of value for every kilogram of waste collected. And you can see that we are, in that project, were a carbon net negative service. So in the Remass project, we managed to get to the stage of saving around 13 kilograms for the period of that 2-month trial. In addition, we're able to turn every 1,000 kilograms, every 1 ton of plastics into almost $90,000 of revenue, because this is the kind of benefits that you get conventional versus us. And we do that through a combination and optimization, if you like, of the products that we sell, because the benefit of having a circular economy like ours is you can sell things at any point in the circle. You can sell granulate, you can sell filament, you can sell products. And because product is the highest value thing, the more you invest in the machines themselves, the manufacturing appliances, the more value you get from the product component of this. So what does it take to actually get us on board? So some information for applicants who are interested in applying to the AcceliGOV program. In total, there are 6 questions. Right? What we're looking for is key long-term sustainable adoption and cross-category systemic value. Now, that is a lot of words. Now, what we basically are looking for is an adoption pathway. If you're like, how are you going to get us on board and ensure that that circular economic value is contained within your deliverables? And one of the key things with that is not to think just about the waste collection component of this. While that's obviously where we would plug in, the reality is by taking our service, you also get other procurement categories for free. For example, things like fixtures and fittings, minor works, repairs, and it creates the opportunity for cross-category systemic value within local authorities, as well as an opportunity to create brand new economies locally, because now you're facilitating much of the repair economy that a lot of parts of the world are currently looking to adopt themselves. So a couple of example ideas, but remember, we are a versatile process. One example might very well be apartment blocks, where you have large complexes where lots of people live. We would take some space in the shoot room, and at that point we would collect the waste, recycle it into the film, and turn it into product. With each other floor, every other floor, for example, in a building, able to manufacture the products to repair as much as made of plastic as possible. That way you're using the rubbish as a resource to then deliver greater value. Another example might very well be housing associations, where you might have a distributed estate, for example, council housing in the UK or in some parts of Europe. In that sort of setup, you might have a container that you place somewhere, and then you deliver value by fixing the houses within your estate using the rubbish that that estate creates. A third way might very well be that local governments capture and process the waste. So what happens is that the government buildings, in their garbage room, they would have a facility which would then capture the waste, turn it into filament, but then send it on to 3D printers which are located in schools, universities, libraries, and that would then create value and create an opportunity for the local societies to create manufacturing industries, if you like, small-scale manufacturing industries, facilitate the repair society, but also deliver education into schools, colleges, often from material and from scanning that's done in universities as part of the research network. So one of the areas we're examining is whether or not universities can become, I'll call it, publishers of models of, say, archaeological artifacts that can then be disseminated digitally into the schools and then taught by the teachers in those areas to kind of create a more engaging learning experience. So that's another example of that. So it's totally flexible. You can try and find projects that might work really well. You're obviously welcome to get in touch with us to ask questions, ask if things are possible. But in general, you should be able to safely assume that a lot of things are possible because of the kind of very flexible nature and very wide repertoire that we have. So the AcceliGOV program this year actually has 2 different parts to it. What we're trying to analyze with this is whether or not working directly with cities is the way to go, or working through a tier 1 supplier would actually be the way to go. Because both of these have different benefits and drawbacks. One of the most obvious ones is that a lot of cities might not be ready themselves to do a circular procurement process. In that sort of case, they might actually benefit from taking a tier 1 supplier position, but then giving them 2 categories to actually work with. In another case, other cities might have already been deploying donor economic models, and that's the areas that they could certainly take us on without any issue at all, because they're well ahead of the kind of educational innovation sort of spaces for the basics of donor economics. And as a result, they're in a position to be able to take it more or less plugging in. So the way we want to process this is through 2 particular channels, if you like. One of them for cities and one of them for the corporations. So if we take a look at the cities first, the way it will work is the applications will close and then we will do a shortlist. Now that shortlist will deliver 5 initial prizes of $2,000 of consulting each. Now the idea behind this is to actually analyze some of the waste that you get and look at the potential economic value of that waste to the city itself. And this may mean directly with the city. It may mean looking at the city and the public-private linkages, as well as educational establishments and lots of other opportunities, because this is kind of partly a blue sky access, but also a waste audit. because that will then give us an understanding of which of the organizations is best placed to exploit the prize the best. Because ultimately, remember, long-term sustainability and adoption pathways are a key part of this. What will then happen is that we will choose the successful city, who will then get $70,000 of that prize to deploy a pilot in that area. And that might be one or two possible facilities, not necessarily just one. It might be one facility with a large mix of 3D print manufacturing appliances, or it might very well be two different smaller segments in their own right. And that would allow the cities themselves to choose the configuration. Once that has been done, we'll then go through the process of doing the site surveys, choosing the products that should be in the catalog, installing the infrastructure, piloting the operations, actually running it, and doing a demonstration and dissemination of that information to the city itself as well as the wider society. So the city is encouraging people to come to them, if you like, with potential problems and solutions. And as a result, it's driving some of that, the kind of sharing economy, repairing economy that we want to sort of see within our ethos, but also most cities around the world agree is a good way forward. Now, the corporation model is much simpler, but also the prize is much smaller. So the applications will close, we'll conduct the assessment, and it will be simply select the best scoring supplier. Now, there are obviously differences with this model because we're now a private sector connection, and that does mean that there are some, if you like, requirements that must be met by both types of applicant. So in terms of eligibility, if you like, and what we're looking for, as I said previously, the cities must show an adoption pathway. If you have evidence of delivering a circular economy and then buying products from the output of that circular economy, that stands you in really good stead, because that does demonstrate that you understand the total cycle, because it's very easy to kind of release waste into a quote-unquote circular economy but never see that again, because that waste you have no traceability of downstream. So with that, we're looking for cities who can demonstrate circularity and especially adoption of the waste from and the output of that same circular process, which they were also the input. Also include some thoughts around the long-term impact beyond the pilot stage, right? Because that's really kind of key for us. It's not enough just to do the pilot and say, okay, that's great, that's fantastic. We need to see what that legacy is going to be, because that then delivers some of that initial ignition pump priming, if you like, work that can then help you deliver a greater benefit beyond the end date of the project. Also, factor in any future sustainable procurements. Now, this tends to happen when you have a strategy for circular economy, a strategy for donut economy within your council strategic aims. And that's useful, but it can't just be the only thing you have. A demonstrable adoption pathway is crucial within that. But if you are planning to change to a more sustainable procurement model in the future, do include aspects of that, because we work across all 17 SDGs. So we're not just catering for climate change or something else, because that really doesn't deliver the sort of change that as equitable as people believe they should be. Also, obviously, consider revenue streams and delivering new and novel service to civic and private sector. As I said previously, the repair economy is on the up, and it should be encouraged more for the purposes of reducing waste. So as a result of that, do think about new and novel streams of work that you think might be appropriate. And don't discount things like sort of arts potential or education, as well as the conventional waste recycling process. Secondly, for the corporations themselves, we're only looking to work with tier 1 suppliers, unfortunately. And the reason why is because it's a faster rate of change. Now, that does mean you have to have an existing city relationship, and it must have another year to run. And it should be in a related category, but it doesn't have to absolutely be. So things like minor works tend to work well into fixtures and fittings that can repair spaces. Waste recycling is obviously another good one, but they must be able to demonstrate that they have an existing city relationship and there's at least a year to run, including any extensions they might have got. Now, this does also mean that universities with existing relationships are eligible. If you are a university and you think you can work with a private sector organization in an equitable way, do consider applying there as well. Because our ultimate aim is to deliver these decentralized, ambitious, global circular economies. Because we're doing for manufacturing what the internet did for mainframe computers back in the day. We are decentralizing the models, democratizing the models, so that cities and communities themselves can get heavily and deeply involved with maintenance of their own locations, and distributes the gains, climate, carbon, equity, and cash across society more equitably. And with that, I think that's more or less it. So yes, I'm now able to take any questions, so feel free to ask me if you haven't got time. Thanks again.